And Adam, please feel free to start whenever you would like.
Thank you. So it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the second plenary of the annual meeting of the National Academy of Education. Yesterday, we had a wonderful session on the future of equal opportunity. And today's plenary session is on an important hot topic, artificial intelligence innovations for learning and for education research. The plenary session will be led by Professor Roy P., the Jacks Professor of Education and Learning Sciences at Stanford University. And we will get started shortly. But first, I have a short commercial message. That's right, you saw it in your email today. The National Academy of Education has released a new publication on evaluating and improving teacher preparation programs. This is our fourth publication on this topic. We're very proud of it, and I hope you will all check it out. You can find it in your email and also on the National Academy of Education website. And now I will turn things over to Maria Gahan from the National Academy of Education to talk about some logistics.
Great, thank you, Adam, and good morning, everybody. So for this session, we have 4 panelists who will be speaking in their individual breakout rooms. They'll be presenting twice in a row, so you'll get the chance to hear from 2 of them. And we are asking you to do a little task to help us more easily move you into breakouts, given the size of the number of attendees we have here today. So you see on my slide the 4 panelists and their topics. And what we would like you to do is rename yourself in Zoom so that the number that corresponds with the session you'd like to go to first comes at the beginning of your name. So you can see that my name now is 4-Marie again. So please do that now. If you don't know how to rename yourself, what you do is you hover over your little tile that's in the grid. There then pops up a blue button with 3 dots. Click that, and then rename should be the final thing in that menu. Then you just type in the number at the beginning of your name. If you have any trouble with this or don't know how to do it, what you can also do is chat, put the number in the chat that you'd like to go to first. And just a reminder, we're doing this twice. So this is just the first breakout you want to attend. The second breakout, we will provide further instructions on how to do that in a moment. And I will now hand it off to our chair, Dr. Roy P.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second plenary. I certainly enjoyed Ed's yesterday. Artificial intelligence, or simply AI, has become one of the most pervasively adopted technologies in history. It's now integrated into billions of smartphones and services as diverse as speech recognition agents like Siri and Alexa, and recommendation services for music, movies, books, retail purchasing, and route mapping for driving. It's possible that AI and its related technologies could become highly consequential for the future of learning, teaching, and educational systems. Our scholarly community in education research and all of education stakeholders should critically consider how to best develop and use AI in education so that it will be equitable, ethical, and effective while guarding against data and design risks and harms. What is AI? In 1956, Stanford's John McCarthy offered one of its first definitions. The study of artificial intelligence is to proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can, in principle, be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. Accenture's definition will suit us today. AI is a constellation of many different technologies working together to enable machines to sense, comprehend, act, and learn with human-like levels of intelligence. Integral to this AI terrain are machine learning and natural language processing. Machine learning is a type of AI enabling systems to learn patterns from data, make predictions, and then improve future experience by applying the newly discovered patterns to situations not included in their initial design. When you receive product recommendations shopping with an online retailer, their suggestions are driven by machine learning, since their AI is always improving at figuring out what you're likely to buy. However useful, these forms of AI are considered narrow AI, tooled to performing a single task or closely related tasks. General AI, as in sci-fi films, where sentient machines emulate human intelligence, think strategically, handling a broad range of complex tasks, is not yet reality. Although AI computing works at remarkable scale and speed, human-machine collaboration is crucial as humans provide guidance in labeling data from which machines can learn. So AI thus far augments human capabilities rather than replacing them. Recognizing the possibilities and limits of AI will become more of an everyday topic of conversation as people seek to make sense of the stunning digital transformations they are experiencing in quest to fulfill their hopes to fully participate in, benefit from, and adapt to the new occupations and skill needs that will emerge. Now we must ask, how does AI relate to educational systems, teaching and learning processes, and educational research? In short, how can AI serve human purposes in promoting learning and enhancing education research? Last year, the nonprofit Digital Promise convened a panel of 22 experts in AI and in learning for several days to consider broad questions. What do education leaders need to know about AI in support of student learning? What do researchers need to tackle beyond the ordinary to enhance new knowledge for shaping AI and learning for the good? Their synthesis suggests 3 layers for framing AI's meaning for educators. The first, that AI can be viewed as a computational intelligence for contributing an additional resource to an educator's abilities and strength in tackling educational challenges. The second, that AI brings specific, exciting new capabilities to computing, including sensing, recognizing patterns, representing knowledge, making and acting on plans, and supporting naturalistic interactions with people. These capabilities can be engineered into solutions that support learners with varied strengths and needs, such as allowing students to use handwriting, gestures, or speech as input modalities, in addition to the keyboard and mouse. The third layer is that AI may be used as a toolkit to enable imagining, studying, and discussing future learning scenarios that don't exist yet. One central idea I wish to communicate is that AI in education is about so much more than ed tech applications, such as tutoring systems and adaptive learning technologies, which you learned about from a plenary panel in 2012 if you were here when Susan Furman was our president. Of course, developments in AI are still contributing to this vision, and you'll hear several related talks today by Professors Ken Kadinger and James Lester. Yet AI is also making headway in facilitating the processes involved in educational research practices themselves. Professor Carolyn Rose will share her work on modeling how collaborative processes interact with learning processes. Marcelo Worsley will characterize how multimodal learning analytics employs AI for measuring student performances during complex learning tasks. Let us now join them for their talks and your questions.
Thank you, Roy. And if you haven't yet done so, please either rename yourself with the number corresponding to the first session you want to join, or put it into the chat. And I think our tech team will just need a minute or two to get everyone shuffled. In the meantime, I also want to mention that we will be going straight from the first breakout to the second, so you won't have to rename yourself again, but rather you'll be able to move yourself, and staff will be in the room to tell you exactly how to do that, so you don't need to worry about it at the moment. So I think, Jenny, if you're ready to open up the rooms, please go ahead and do so.
Welcome back, everyone. I, of course, wish we could have seen all 4 of the talks, but I hope that you were able to participate in 2 of the sessions at least. And my charge in these next moments, before we have Eva Baker giving some prepared remarks, is to first invite our 4 speakers to address a single question that we thought would be productive for setting off some sparks. What is a primary tension or dilemma in your research work? So I invite any of our speakers to contribute to that and then converse with one another for a moment before we open things up.
I can go first. This will actually be answering a question that I didn't get to answer in the closed session. So there's this fundamental problem with all AI technologies. There is such an opportunity to do well and to do ill with fairness. And if we're making the collective decision that we're going to move forward with AI in education, which I think is an important and incredibly promising thing to do, we have to not just acknowledge, but we have to actively deal with the problem that these technologies are being driven by data that are creating models that are either going to be fair or they're not going to be fair. And thinking hard about the best ways to combat this, both in terms of how we collect the data, who's interacting with the systems to create the data, and then finally, how do we actually incorporate these models into our runtime systems? That's, I think, the hardest problem, and it will be with us forever.
That's a great consideration, James, and it foregrounds for me how we need philosophical inquiry as a central part of the engagement with the Academy and this community on these questions.
I'm happy to build on that some, and I think, you know, one of the challenges that for me comes up is wrestling between privacy and context. And I'll say this because, you know, within some of the work that we've been doing, we've been recording audio, but then we throw away the actual audio afterwards because we want to preserve people's identity. We don't want to preserve their identity, we want to preserve their privacy. But that also introduces a challenge of that when you throw away the audio record, you lose a lot of the context. And you just end up with the transcript. And then there's no way of even knowing, was this transcript right or wrong? Was this accurate? Was this correct? And so there's these tensions between wanting to maintain privacy of the participants, but also wanting to be able to stay true to the context. Because we've all probably seen, for example, those transcripts of something like of a meeting we were in, and you look at it, you're like, I definitely didn't say that. That was kind of weird. And so I think that is one of the tensions is privacy, but also at the same time wanting to ensure that you have appropriate context. Because I think context ends up being so important to research, and it also is really, really important to how we go about trying to use these AI systems.
So going in a different direction, I guess, to me, you know, I'm a big fan of AI, you know, and technology as potentials, but ultimately, you know, the most important thing in my experience with these projects is to do, I like to call it use-centered design rather than user-centered, because I think you got to get in there and do it. And community engagement is, I find there's a big tension there between trust building on one side and problem solving on the other side, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, we want to build these systems to help community members solve problems they have and recognize they have, right? But some of these things, you know, so much of learning goes on outside of our conscious awareness that sometimes the opportunities for improvement are not so directly in the awareness of folks. So on the problem solving side, you know, how do we introduce that while we build and maintain trust in these community-based use-driven design interactions?
Yes, what I think you're highlighting there, Ken, is that a lot of these technologies make learning much more visible than it has been in the past.
For sure. And actually, one of the cool outputs I've seen over and over again, we were just talking about the other day in another project, is the sense in which it models some activities that then get picked up by teachers or by tutors, right? They see, oh, I don't have to be telling all the time. I can sit back and watch and jump in and help, or more specifics about the nature of the tools and the nature of the interactions and so forth.
So what's sweet about that example is it foregrounds that teacher innovations could be an important side effect or even sought out.
That's right. And the techniques in AI development got to go like this, right? It's not about AI. It's like, what's the best technique? And sometimes that's led, right, by the folks involved, and then the AI follows, and sometimes it goes the other way. And I think that's super interesting and powerful. But trust and problem solving, that, you know, you asked me about attention, I feel that tension.
I feel.
Yeah, I guess I agree with all of this. I think that there are so many problems though that stand in the way between the part of the research that's what we do and the impact that we want to achieve that we don't have control over. And in part, I think, and I would come back to a comment that Roy made when he was introducing this, that, you know, people have a fear right now and an over expectation of artificial intelligence that gets in the way of our work having a positive impact. And how do we actually address that problem? If the over expectation and the fear makes it so that maybe teachers don't get enough training to be able to use the tools well, because there's an expectation that all you have to do is put the technology there, or the fear that says, I'm so afraid of these fairness and bias issues that I just don't want that technology anywhere near my classroom because I'm just so convinced that if I did that, it's going to be bad. You know, so how do we address that? Because it's not directly part of our research, but it is something that stands in between the research that we're doing and the impact that we want to have.
And it becomes a very legitimate topic of the research, the fear itself. I mean, there's recently a paper by Holmes and others, including Ken, that highlighted with 60 AI and education researchers that they feel fundamentally untrained to work on ethical issues. And that's foregrounds a central issue for the field. Thanks each of you for very evocative of tensions and dilemmas. Feels like you're helping us build up, like Marcelo's Minecraft talk, an image of the tensions for the AI in education researchers. So, Eva, we need to have ample time for you and some engagement from our community. So I will work with you to determine how you'd like to proceed on that count. You know that you're timing better than I do.
Right. I'm rapidly editing my what I had written. Did Marcelo get a chance to answer your question? I'm sorry, I may have come in late. Your tension question.
I was just in his session and I was hearing some tensions, but no, I think he can bring them into the room right now.
Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the tensions that I think we've kind of talked about, and I think James touched on this, is this idea of the promise versus the ethics, and even how to engage that as we also engage local organizations. There's ways that we can talk about it to where people kind of say, okay, I don't want to touch AI at all. Like I just none of it. Versus there's other ways that we talk about it where it becomes so positivist that it's kind of like, oh yeah, we have to, and you end up having a sort of, you end up being naive to, they end up being naive to some of the challenges. So I think from a sort of an education perspective, I think about how do we do a really good job of helping youth think about the possibilities, but also being really, really critical of some of the ways that this technology can go wrong, and the technology does go wrong. I think that's, more broadly speaking, I think within the education community, I don't know that we do a great job on this, and even thinking about our own U.S. history, for example. We have a hard time talking about many of the problematic things that the U.S. government has done alongside the ways that we have experienced quote unquote progress, right? And so I think from an educational perspective, as we look to start engaging more youth, and for me, that's one of my big bent is like, let's get more youth designing and inventing with AI. How do we do that in a way that is really true to a lot of these concerns that we've started to talk about within the space of there's questions around bias, there's questions around fairness. And you know, all of that I think is with the hope that in the future that we will have trained up a group of the future generation to be able to handle and to be able to actually effectively wrestle between these things. Because I mean, I feel like in my AI education, these things didn't come up. It was kind of like, hey, look, here's all the great things that AI can do. We can make robots so that they can bring us dinner, and we can do all these other things. But there really wasn't a discussion around the ethics. There wasn't a discussion around data privacy. There wasn't a discussion around, you know, even going a few levels down, no discussion around the energy required to sort of build these models. And so I think there's a lot of deep discussions to be had there. And I think it's going to be a challenge for us to come up with sort of educational programs that are really going to make sure we're hitting on, I mean, again, we don't want to scare people away from AI. I think AI is happening. It's not like that ship is going to stop, but to also make sure that they know what those challenges are and to start to engage them in how to address them. And I think it's hard to do because we don't even know how to address all of the challenges. So for me, those are some of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of the future and in terms of some of these tensions.
Yes, where algorithmic oppression is a foregrounded topic, not something that lives in a closet somewhere because it's a hot topic.
One thing I'd just like to just add on to what Marcelo was saying, I think that even within our learning sciences and technology community, there isn't necessarily the level of mutual understanding where we all agree on what AI is, what it can do, and the level of expectation and fear that's reasonable. And I think if we want to be able to address these issues out in the world where it's more challenging, we should start close to home, because I don't even see in our own communities that we've achieved that. I even see sometimes articles and I'm like, how could that person have said that? So I think we need to listen to each other better first.
Thank you, everyone, and Marcelo. Eva.
Yes, thank you. I'm, as I said, rapidly editing myself down and will engage in compressed speech. Could I get, assuming I have 15 minutes or so, could I get from one of the staff a 2-minute warning after 13 minutes so I don't miss my most important comments? Thank you, everyone, for your great presentations, and to you, Roy, for your wisdom, and the NAEd members that allowed this to go forward, and to the staff always who facilitate our efforts. I'm going to begin with some personal background, essentially for a shot of credibility to some of you. I've been involved in the development of learning technologies since the time we used punch cards for input. Going back 40 years, I evaluated the West game by John Seeley Brown and Richard Burton, probably one of the first AI-supported games, and followed that with substantial effort in evaluation of games and simulations. Although my team makes some of this, I mostly study and look at AI and its effects. One early set of investigations supported by DARPA looked at the expectations, as Roy captured them, of systems that trying to emulate human intelligence. And in that study, we engaged in human benchmarking, that is putting vision systems, natural language processing, and expert systems on measurement scales that pertain to levels that people could attain. For instance, could the vision system solve hidden figure problems, or whether natural language systems had reading comprehension comparable to first graders or fifth graders. OECD, the Organization for Economic Community Development, is currently engaged in a very similar study. But early on to me, it became clear that AI-enabled systems first of all, in intelligent tutoring systems could easily outperform human capability using their pattern finding inferences, multiple variables, and speed, just to name some obvious dimensions. And right now, as many of the speakers noted, social and emotional domains are catching up. I want to note that I think AI has had powerful side effects. Its R&D has led to usable models and tools for infrastructure application in assessment in particular in classrooms and for less sophisticated technologies. For instance, the use of ontologies as a way to capture content and domains of cognitive requirements that are modeled on AI requirements are now available for use in the classroom. To help instructors and kids get a better sense of what's going on. There also have been relatively well-known applications in assessment, like in the scoring of writing based on Landauer's early work in semantic analysis. Creating reusable modular designs for performance assessment and learning also derives directly from advances in computer science. Let me switch to the future and consider short-term and longer-term outcomes. First, I have heard there's a general belief that AI expansion is underway. James Lester pointed that out, and that belief is exponential. Oh my goodness, I just lost my. There it's back, in size and speed. So whether or not AI will have consequences of economic displacement, we really don't know, but that's a fear that's been identified internationally. The further development of high-powered intuitive tools described by Ken and used, let's say, by Art Grazer's team, allow the application of AI-supported systems by both experts and non-computer science people and applies to a wide range of domains. I think these will augment technical breakthroughs within the AI community itself. Takeaway here is the speed of change in the AI domain is likely to be explosive. And then the next obvious question is, are we ready for it? When and how do we intervene to understand and insert some control over this burgeoning endeavor? So I think there are three considerations with equity at their heart. They're transparency, standards, and social acceptance. First, we need to understand and periodically document what algorithms are doing, how they are developed, that is, what groups or have they been trained or what groups have not been participating in providing data for training, and what is the evidence of their validity. Can we see through the mysteries of code and interpret their intended and unintended outcomes? Certainly, proprietary constraints affect the degree of transparency we're going to have. Second note is the need for principles or standards. And as many of you know, there are standards that have been developed by DoD and others to try to constrain or put some boundaries around AI development, human control, and documentation requirements. A core question there, of course, is who's represented at that table, who's setting those standards. Third, there's the acceptance issue that many of you have noted. And my sense is that will be greater acceptance for AI in the service of specific domain-related learning, such as reading and mathematics. But I wonder how we traverse the skepticism of educators, and for instance, parents who may not be comfortable with the scientific underpinnings of AI approaches or the scientific underpinnings of most anything. In particular, it seems to me that AI that addresses social and emotional learning may be at odds with the belief of parent groups who want to limit school efforts to the 3 R's. Those of us in the California assessment community can remember the uproar caused by the inclusion of problem solving in performance assessments, where parents felt that that exceeded the remit of the schools. Now let me say something about the future. I'd like to reset, if I could, and underscore the goals for AI and other technologies with reference to the Gordon plenary session yesterday. I won't go into his list. That would take much more time than I have available. But I've been a member of a seminar with him and Ezekiel Dixon Roman over the last more than a year, trying to put together issues associated with differential cultural experiences, backgrounds, aspirations, and goals. And this does lead to Adam's question about how does assessment have to change, and change radically. I would propose that AI experts also devote themselves to potentially more complex goals based on embedded or seamless connections between learning and assessment. I think good learning and good assessment, when held up to the light, are indistinguishable, as you might find in maker environments such as Yasmin Kafai or Richard DeBrand. So here are a couple of probably not enough time, but I have a couple of foci for the future. One is to support the generative approach for students and the use of multimodal analytics at even a finer level of specificity. Second, to switch from trying to have students achieve common goals to creating personal goals and adapting to individuals, both not only on the instructional and recommender side, but also in generating options for them as outcomes or targets. Third, it seems to me that, and this is also comes from Professor Gordon, that AI can already measure processes that occur during learning. The focus on processes by which students learn not only provides a basis for prediction and generalization, as well as application to unforeseen situations, that is the future. Fourth, see if one important vision of Professor Gordon's is the systematic development of intellective capacity. And here the outcome would rather than a status change would be a growth and development curves, and looking at both processes and sets of processes embedded in domains. We could report these changes, perhaps in the acquisition of qualifications, and they're quite different from the current conception of learning trajectories. They're not ticking off something on a preordained map, but they're really following the nap of the earth for individual students. The implication of these changes will shift attention from common test scores to performance on differential sets of tasks applied in situations that matter to individuals who come with quite diverse backgrounds, and but who wish to achieve clear and differentiated levels of excellence. My concern is the divisive social environment that we're in right now leads us to consider whether this vision can be implemented. Even in the arcane world of our academy, methods and strategies for validity and determining quality and value of such outcomes would need, great modification. Last, I'd like to share a word from my continuing courses in Spanish, both conversational classes and Duolingo, where I am always in the top 3 of the top leagues. So I want you to know that I've bought into the motivational component. There's a word in Spanish called crecer, which means to grow. And I think that what we're talking about is using and monitoring AI as it promotes growth. But crecer also means to grow into one's own. And I think that captures the individualized nature of what I hope AI tools will be able to do to help each learner grow into their own and to approach their true capability. Thanks.
Thank you, Eva. I love the weaving from the session today and the tensions demonstrated by our speakers to the Professor Gordon session yesterday. And this sounds like quite enviable year that you've spent with him and colleagues. I suspect we have all of about 2 minutes if my clock is correct. If someone would like to be brave to speak forward or type a question into the chat for our illustrious group.
So Roy, this is Gloria Latson-Billings, and so I'm going to actually ask a question that I had asked in my last session and we got kicked out. So and the question is sort of, how much is enough? Now, I know that might sound kind of weird because we're always thinking about how we progress on certain things, but I gave an example of a high school I've been working with in Baltimore where essentially what kids are getting is real-time information about how they're doing. They're not getting a tutor, they're not getting any assistance, but it turns out knowing how many classes I've missed, what my grades are right now has been really incredibly motivating for them. And I think about, I'm kind of like Eva. When I started with this computer stuff, we literally were taking the tops off of the machine and looking inside and doing, I don't need to know that stuff. So I'm wondering if we're at a point where less is more, I guess, as opposed to more being more.
Well, Gloria, if you're talking about not wanting transparency, that you'd be happy with a black box, I think that's not going to be where the community is going to press, because the black box doesn't allow the people that are affected by the black box to have any say over its outcomes.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Gloria, I do think that, these kinds of data feedback that are sort of self-nudging power, right, through social comparison, it is super powerful. And as you say, it is simple, right? And the more we can do simple, the better, for sure. I don't know if that's going to be enough, because sometimes, sometimes that isn't enough, I guess, I would claim. And then, and then we should try to do other things they're not, what we're talking about is not incompatible with that kind of feedback. In fact, one of the things I do think that, I guess I would say that in the end, I don't care if it has AI in it, but I do care if it works. And one of the reasons it works is that at all levels, there are these better, faster feedback cycles. Mm-hmm. Students get data sooner, teachers, tutors, researchers, all the way up. We can then do continual improvement through that data cycle. And the technology makes it a little bit easier to get that data, and maybe we analyze it with machine learning too, but I'm also not a big believer in a black box analysis of the data, because that often just replicates biases. It looks at indicator variables rather than causal variables. And we need theory to be part of that analysis and people to be a part of the analysis to get at the real causal factors.
I guess it would hinge on the nature of the feedback loop. There was a presentation yesterday, a very good one, about productive failure and the role that it has in learning. We've gotten those great reports from Dan Schwartz and and Bransford that looked at that kind of feedback. So I've been on online teaching where people, start to quibble between a 7 and an 8 and an 8 and a 9, and sort of my feeling is it pulls away from the big picture, the long trajectory. And we know that the right dosage of struggle that is, appropriate for their age grade, is worthwhile. And having the opportunity for a do-over and having that kind of learning environment culture that is more specified as to what the outcome and not some number or not some idea that this is what you got on this. We got to get, that was the point that I think Bob Mislevy was making yesterday in his presentation.
I think a slightly different flavor on this less is more issue comes back to the idea of what we've learned from our studies and what we can do versus the perception that people have about it and what would make it valuable. I've actually experienced a lot in interactions with potential clients, this idea that they feel more value in the AI if it's more in the student's face. They think, I want to see these agents in the collaborative conversation more often, doing more things, very present. Where we believe actually, and what we've seen in our data is that we want to be very sparing about when we bring them in and what they're actually doing so that we actually give the students and their interaction with each other center stage. But then when we do that, and even if the results from our studies say that that's the right thing to do, it makes the people who don't know the literature or don't understand what the AI is doing, they want to see more to prove to them that we have this technology that's going to do something, And so I think I'd like to convince our clients of this less is more idea actually, more, because I think if they were doing what Ken was saying, really looking at what does the science say is the valuable feedback and support, they would believe that, actually don't want to always be seeing it constantly.
Well, maybe AI is a bit like jokes. An occasional people remember a story, but if people were only telling jokes all the time.
Yeah. I like that.
If there's time, I'd like to ask a question. If there's time. Yeah, I'm just wondering who within AI is theorizing culturally sustaining pedagogies or cultural relevance, cultural heritage, and the importance of that being a way in which to offer instruction and even assess.
Great question.
Well, I would go ahead. Oh, so real quick, just the partners that we have in the project, the PL2 project I have at the Center for Urban Education, are thinking about those issues and engaging in these after-school programming situations in culturally responsive pedagogy and social justice projects, and I'm learning a lot from them. But I guess within the AI realm per se, I think there's a lot of sensitivity to those issues, but I don't know of something to point you to.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you shoot me an email, I'm happy to share. I know a handful of people doing work in this space. My work touching on this area. I know Nikki Washington just has a new NSF Include Center that is around identity inclusive computer science. It is computer science, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be an AI slant to that. Thomas Phillips' work out at UC Berkeley is definitely thinking about ways for this to work to be culturally sustaining. And then for me right now, I'll just got another project that I'll be doing in Hawaii, about connecting some work around physical computing and AI with a native Hawaiian school. So I think there's definitely people doing work within this space. I'm happy to shoot you to respond to an email. And point
So
you
your
towards those.
sports work, you should mention for those that couldn't hear your talk, because that's definitely in this area, sports and sensing and AI.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, one of the projects I have right now is a CS for All that is connecting between physical education and coding class, but really trying to use artificial intelligence and physical computing as ways for engaging largely Black and Brown youth in designing and inventing with technology, and letting them see both some of the benefits and promises of AI, but also part of some of the challenges, where these things go wrong, how you can hack these little smartwatches that people carry around. So that too, I think, fits within that space. But yeah, just shoot me an email. Happy to share a good list of folks.
Thank you. Well, with that fitting dialogue around culturally responsive pedagogy and AI in the future of learning, I want to thank our fantastic panelists and participants for presenting their work, providing the context for us, and repeatedly working to center not only research issues, but ethical principles. Look forward to future dialogues as we develop a project in this area in the Academy.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you to all the speakers, and we'll see you soon at the afternoon's activities.